In this episode, I talked to Dr. Avery Wang, founder of Shazam and nowadays principal research scientist at Apple. Avery co-founded Shazam, invented the groundbreaking algorithm behind the music identification app, and served as a chief scientist for the following 18 years until Shazam was acquired by Apple for a reported $400 million. Avery graduated with 4 mathematics and electrical engineering degrees from Stanford, conducted neuroscientific research on a Fulbright grant at the Ruhruniversität Bochum in Germany from 1990 to 1992, before then finding his way into Silicon Valley startup scene. We talk about his path and find out about the moonshot problem he faced at Shazam.
The question is, you have this sample of audio, about 5 seconds worth, and you want to find this segment in 50 million songs.
His responsibility in the founding team.
My co-founders had already laid out a schedule, and it's kind of funny. They on the schedule they said it said establish office, hire people, invent algorithm. So there's actually a deadline. Invent algorithm.
How he struggled with it.
I thought, okay, so the guys probably shouldn't be this enthusiastic, and maybe don't do so many VC pushes, don't hire so many people, especially if you have no money. Just slow down a bit. I don't think I have this.
And how he eventually solved it with an algorithm that has been used 70 billion times since he invented it. We also find out about his learnings from his Fulbright time, some of which the ingenuity of German engineering.
I guess we were eventually in Regensburg for 6 weeks. My impression was, wow, these windows are really robust.
Sorry for some audio quality issues on my side, but our conversation was too awesome to retake it. Therefore, I'm certain you'll enjoy this episode with Dr. Avery Wang, interviewed by Mohammed Kari. I want to do a bit of a slightly different kind of intro, which would be a song quiz. Would you be up for such kind of thing?
Sure. I don't really know any music, but I guess we can go for it.
Let's try. So...
Well, I would have no idea.
That is so funny, because actually this is the most Shazam song of all time. It's Dance Monkey by Tones and I. And do you have an idea, a ballpark of how many times this song was Shazammed? Just a ballpark.
Oh, I wouldn't have any idea, but if you say it's popular, then it must be, I don't know, let's say a couple 100,000.
It has been Shazammed 40 million times. So that is the number of times it was Shazammed. So I gave you exactly 15.
That tells you how much I know.
So I gave you exactly 15 seconds, the time that originally Shazam needed to recognize a song, right? I think nowadays it's much faster. So yes, 40 million times of Shazams. This alone is a massive number, but I did a bit of research and it only becomes more impressive, right? Up to its 20th anniversary 2 weeks ago, Shazam had over 2 billion installs. The company took 14 years to become profitable, but was eventually acquired by Apple in 2018 for a reported $400 million. I'm not asking whether this is true or not a question today. And it is now accessible with Siri out of the box on every iPhone. So the Shazam algorithm was used to identify songs 70 billion times overall, with more than 200 million monthly active users. What do you think when you hear all of this?
Well, I guess maybe the simple answer is, I guess those are big numbers.
These are big numbers. They are indeed insane numbers, I would say. Let's dig a bit into how this came to be. So first of all, of course, I'm interested. I already said a bit about your role. We're going to talk about this in a minute, or maybe in some minutes. But before we go there, actually, I want to understand much more about you. So and maybe let's start simple. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in the East Bay of near San Francisco in Walnut Creek, and went to public high school there, and you know.
I see. So I've read in the internet that your curiosity in science started with blowing up stuff, or let's put it a bit more academically, maybe with reaction experiments, imitating some pyro scenes from Star Trek when you were like 10. So my first question then, context would be, you have kids in that age. Do you push them to also blow up stuff?
Well, my kids are older now, but when they were younger, I didn't really push them to blow up stuff, but I encouraged them to. I encouraged them to break things.
Okay.
Uh, they didn't really, but I guess my thinking is that you don't really understand things until you break them. Um, so appliances or old equipment, I would ask them to take it apart and play with them until they broke.
Okay. I see. I think it's close enough, right? Maybe a bit less dangerous, I hope. You yourself graduated from Stanford with a math bachelor's and a math master's and an electrical engineering master's and a PhD in electrical engineering. So blowing up stuff seems to be quite the opposite of sitting in front of endless pages of math formulas, of algorithms. So what is it that sparked your interest in math and electrical engineering specifically?
Yeah. Well, going back a bit, so for me, blowing up stuff wasn't simply, well, okay, I mean, it was really fun and gratuitous, and I would set things on fire just for fun, but, like pouring gasoline on a fire, that kind of thing. But it was also like a serious way for me to study, science, chemistry, especially chemistry, and some electronics when I was really young. Um, so, for example, some of the explosives I cooked up, um, I learned about stoichiometry, which is in chemistry sort of, um, uh, I guess, an area of studying how um, what proportions things should be mixed in. So, if you want to make a good explosion, you got to make sure the ingredients are in the right proportions. And then I kind of went on to studying reactions, chemical reactions, oxidation and that kind of thing. And then when I was in seventh grade or so, I taught myself electrochemistry, and I was able to figure out even more complicated reactions. And in fact, I found an error in the CRC handbook, which is this book back when they had books about maybe 10 centimeters thick with all kinds of tables of chemical potentials, and I actually found an error in a reaction I was studying. So I was very proud of myself.
And how did you then really go into electrical engineering, which is like much less of.
Oh yeah, and then so tying it back to math. So in some sense, math was a vehicle for me to continue some of these investigations, and then it became interesting in its own right. So I liked solving challenging math problems, and so it really continued. I did math competitions, and going to university, it was kind of natural for me to go into mathematics. And I have a long, circuitous tale about how I got to where I am. It wasn't simply a straight shot. But let's say math led to digital signal processing, which is really just more applied math. And so it's basically been math all the way through, but I did take some detours into biology and some neurosciences, which is something I'm still interested in to this day.
What role did music play back then? Normally, like.
Oh, yeah. It just so happens, coincidentally, that my entire career has been associated with audio, audio signal processing. I studied in the computer music department when I was at Stanford, getting my PhD, but I was not actually all that interested in music, if that makes any sense.
So you didn't learn an instrument, for example?
No, I'm not a musician. I don't play any instruments, and I only have a kind of a superficial understanding of the musical landscape. Like, what's the most popular song? Like, gee, I don't know.
I see. I mean, like you already spoke a tiny bit about your PhD. So what did you work on in your PhD?
Well, I was interested in neurosciences and how the brain processes information, and so I decided to study audition, the science of hearing, and so that kind of led me to spending some time in a neuroscience lab studying auditory processing, and then after my PhD, I was supposed to go to another lab as a postdoc to study auditory cortex. And then I got suddenly hired by a startup doing signal processing, so that was sort of the end of my neuroscience career.
How did it come about that you applied for a Fulbright grant? This is what you did, right? So first question is, how did you get the inspiration for this?
So I was working in this neuroscience lab at Stanford for a year studying visual cortex, and I was also interested in oscillatory neurons because there are some theories about information processing and consciousness and all that kind of stuff having to do with oscillatory neural nets. And so at the time there was this breakthrough, this professor in the Max Planck Institute in Frankfurt. It's the Max Planck Institute für Hirnforschung. Professor Wolf Singer, who I wanted to study with. So I applied to a Fulbright and actually received it. And then later on, I found another professor who was at the University of Göttingen, Christoph von der Malsborg, who was more into modeling of these oscillatory neurons. And so then I changed my professorship. My professor from Zinga to Malsborg, and ended up studying under him. And so I think I kind of well, Zinga wasn't too happy with that, I think.
Okay. So I've actually read that you were also studying at the Ruhruniversität of Bochum. Is that true? Or was it in Göttingen?
Yes.
So how did you?
Yeah, so it was kind of a funny story. So I thought, great, I'm going to study under Malsborg in Göttingen, and Göttingen is a nice historic city, and it's going to be great. And so later on, much later on, I discovered that Malsborg was moving to Bochum to start a new lab. And so I thought, okay, Bochum, I've never even heard of Bochum. And so then during my, after starting my Fulbright, we spent 6 weeks in a intensive language program where I went from passable German to actually being able to give some lectures in neuroscience in German. Then during that time, I visited Bochum to meet my professor, and I was kind of not expecting to see what I did.
I'm gonna give you my question here, which I prepared. So, but I think this question just became obsolete because I didn't know that you were actually planning to go to Göttingen. So what I was wanting to ask you was, I grew up in Essen, which is part of the Ruhrgebiet too. So coming from this coastal, high-tech driven Bay Area to a region that is shaped by a history of mining, heavy industry, and World War II, what was your first impression of Germany? And why did you want to go there?
Well,
Which makes
so you're asking, right? So you're asking what was my first impression of
Mhm.
Germany? So that was way before when I first arrived. Um, in I guess we were eventually in Regensburg for 6 weeks. And my impression was, wow, these windows are really robust. Um, I mean, the big chunky German frames with and you can turn the handle and it opens up, but you turn the handle the other way, it kind of opens
And the best
vertically.
part,
And so I
and the
was,
best part about them is that they actually even keep the wind out. That is not also a default in America, right?
yes, it was like incredibly, it's like we don't have windows like this in the US. So that was actually my first
Mhm.
impression. But and Regensburg was very scenic. I mean, it's a historical
Mhm.
town and very charming. But then going to Bochum, I guess I wasn't really I didn't have expectations, but uh, upon arriving, it wasn't what I expected.
I mean, I have to recover a bit here because I mean, like how do you say? I can shit talk about Bochum, but being from Essen, I have to
Mhm.
say, did you see Essen? It is the most beautiful city, of course, of the Ruhrgebiet, and it
Right,
has a lot of charming areas, as we say. Um,
right. Well, my wife is from Essen, actually.
yes, so there you go. Actually, she's from Essen. So did you meet during a Fulbright?
Yes, but we met at a party um, by a mutual friend who also had, well, it wasn't a Fulbright, but she had a Erasmus scholarship studying in Bochum. Um,
I see. So she is,
yeah,
but she was born and was born and grew up in Essen.
yeah.
Wow. Okay, yeah, that is a coincidence. So yeah, sometimes the world is small. Um, I had the question: did the Fulbright time have a sustainable impact on your life? I think that would be at least one answer would be yes. Your wife then. Is there any other sustainable impact that this time had on your life?
Let's see. Well, there were connections, academic and uh, personal connections that I made during that time, and they're very valuable. And Professor Malsborg and I stay in touch, yeah, even after all these
Hmm.
years. And so, and it was, and it also opened my eyes to Europe in general, because Bochum is an excellent place to, as a home base to travel and
The best part about
get
Bochum is that
familiar.
there are so many highways you can leave it. Um,
Right. The best thing about Bochum is it's a good place to leave from.
yes. Okay.
I don't want to say that. Um, but then also it gave me uh, in Bochum in my program there were many foreign students
Mhm.
actually, um, and so I've kept in touch with some of them, and these are lifelong
Mhm.
friends.
I see. So then you came back from the Ruhr of Bochum, this wonderful place. I think, by the way, I should just say as a disclaimer, the Ruhrgebiet has a lot of benefits. So just a tiny bit of an ad here.
Oh yeah, and I also did want to go back and try to give some impressions of Bochum upon arrival.
Oh yeah, please feel free.
So yeah, it was kind of a mixture of industrial, but also green. Because I remember, I guess some of my early impressions were, wow, there's a lot of concrete, and um, by that time, I think there wasn't really a whole lot of
Mhm.
pollution. Um, and I do remember among my first impressions, what it was quite
Mhm.
green. So as you know, the university is right next to the Ruhr, so it was kind of a nice change in scenery to be able to see this river and then forest. I guess Germans are very fond of their forests, so even in a very industrialized city, there's always something to do. At the time we could see a concert or ballet or something for two. At the time it was Deutschmarks, so like 2 Deutschmarks with a student discount, and I thought that was just amazing. And then the way the cities are set up are not like in the U.S. where each little town is fairly self-sufficient with a Bäckerei. You can live comfortably within walking distance of everything you need. Yeah, so it was quite enjoyable, and I thought the quality of life was quite good.
I see. I see. That actually sounds pretty convincing to me. Yes. So, okay. So that was your Fulbright time. Then you came back. You went back to the US. You graduated with your PhD in 1992. What were your life plans at the time? Do you remember? Like, did you already think about becoming a startup founder at the time?
Oh, not at all. I had dreams of becoming a postdoc studying neural information processing, and eventually trying to understand how the brain worked, which is to this day still a kind of a mystery. We still don't know how the brain works exactly, how we get consciousness and all that. So that's what I wanted to do. And startups, industry and all that was just not even interesting to me.
So then my next question has to be, what happened? Because you...
Well, so as I mentioned before, my grand ambitions in neurosciences were suddenly thwarted by being recruited for a startup in multimedia signal processing. And of course, they dangled stock options and promises of great riches in front of me, and I thought, okay. And so then I got to meet some of the people during the interview, and it seemed like they were really smart and kind of fun. So then I just changed course completely. I ended up working on the audio system, which included music synthesis. Yeah, it was really fun. There was a core group of us who would stay, basically, we'd work 36-hour days, and sleep under our desks and continue working because it was very challenging and also very fun.
What was the product?
To work
What
on.
was the product?
It was a multimedia system that would replace all of the multimedia functions in a PC, including graphics, 3D graphics, video, audio, music synthesis, all functions aside from the central processor.
So dedicated chips that would make the processing faster, and that was more or less the goal.
Yeah, well, this was before the time of the GPU, but we were bringing this kind of functionality to the PC.
I see.
And in fact, at one point we were faster than NVIDIA, but then that we eventually lost that lead.
Why did it not work out? What happened to the company in the longer run?
Oh, well, there are some strategic issues where we were, and this is a much longer discussion, but we were in the wrong market segment. We were aiming for the sort of low-level, low-cost commodity PC space where there's really very little profit margin. But what we should have done was aim for the higher-end systems, but that's not what we chose to do.
Did this motivate you to try it again, or like the next step for you, if I see it correctly, was another startup, right? So your own startup, right, with a friend. So was this like an experience that made you want to try it again, or was it an experience that felt like failure and not like avoiding this?
Well, it was kind of so the new startup was based on the previous one, and it was because the processor we built was extremely powerful, and it was basically just the company had failed, but the processor was still around, and so a friend and I decided to start a new company using this processor that we had built. Um, and in a different application. And so that went on for 2 years, and I guess I'm not sure I can go into much detail there, but it was not a great success, I would say. But we the company ended up being acquired by another company in the space, and then I was sort of free and sort of unemployed for a bit of time, and that's kind of when my co-founders approached me.
Okay, so then we're
A Shazam
yes,
co-founder.
the Shazam co-founders. So I think we're now at the Shazam founding team. How and when did it shape then? So what? I think this was 1999, right? So how did it shape this co-founding or this founding team?
Right. So two of my co-founders, Philippe Engelbrecht and Chris Barton, were finishing up their MBAs at the University of California. And of course, at that time, everybody wanted to start their own company. Some people were even dropping out of school to start their own company. And Chris Barton initially approached me, and I ignored his email. I thought, well, this crazy guy with this crazy idea, so I didn't even reply to his email. And then, he eventually dangled free lunch in front of me. Okay.
I tried to.
So then I
I
answered,
start to see a pattern here.
right. But Chris was very persistent, and he got me to go to lunch with him and Philippe, and laid out the problem, and then it sounded interesting. I had no idea how to solve the problem, but then he kept pressing me. I told him I'm not an expert in this. I don't know anything about this. And
So what was the
but then
so what
he kept,
was the idea? What was the company vision at the time that he presented it to you?
oh, so it was pretty much exactly what we ended up doing to this day. Um, using a mobile handset to recognize music. Um, and then at the time it was because there were no apps. The idea was to dial a phone number to make a call, and then our system would listen to it and then text back the answer. So that was kind of the initial plan, but then there was also a roadmap to where we were anticipating the app ecology. And so starting in 2004, 2005, we were predicting that there would be increasing app platforms. And we didn't know at the time what they would be, but when I say we, I mean Chris and Philippe and Dheeraj, who was another co-founder who was based in London, so I didn't meet him for some time. So looking back, I was it's actually pretty impressive that the initial roadmap actually ended up being the roadmap that we were on for essentially the entire trajectory of the company.
So what caught your attention about this opportunity at the time? You said that you had this lunch he presented this idea to you? Did you follow up then? And he kept pressing, and you were not really buying into it?
Yeah, well, like I said, Chris was very persistent, even though I told him um, and Philippe that I had no idea how to do this. Um, they said, "All right, you're the guy."
Why did they
um,
think this?
um, to sort of pat myself on the back, they had done extensive due diligence in the
Mhm.
space, which is quite impressive for some business school students. And so they well, they're very smart. I guess from my point of view, being I guess a scientist, my opinion was scientists must be the smartest people on the planet. But they're very impressive. They had done a complete uh, uh, study of the area in audio signal processing, and they looked up all the experts and asked them um, if this was possible, and if so, who could do it. And eventually, uh, they expanded their network or their graph, and found, I guess, about 200 people or so. Uh, you ask one person, who would you recommend, and then you ask those people, who would you recommend, and eventually it's a kind of a closed
Mhm.
loop where they're all pointing to each other. Um, and then Chris and Philippe said that um, I was one of the most recommended people to take on this task.
Mhm.
And so even though I don't know or didn't know how to do it, uh, people were saying that uh, if even if nobody knows how to do it, if somebody could figure it out, it would be this guy.
How did you get this reputation in this peer group? Was it papers? Was it your previous experience with these startups, even though maybe the business model was not fitting at the time for these previous startups? How was it that everybody was recommending you?
Um, Good question. They talked to my professor, Julius Smith at Stanford, um, and so let's see. I was working on a project in auditory scene analysis, which would take a voice out of a recording and put it in a separate channel. Um, but then I think a lot of it for the industrial stuff, I had a reputation that, because I worked really, really hard in that first
Hmm.
startup, and so I had a reputation around the valley, I
Hmm.
think. Um, so I think one sort of takeaway there is even if a company is failing, you should try your best. And it's not just that the company succeeds or fails, it's that on top of that, you have a reputation. You're also building your brand. Um,
So, what was exactly the technical challenge about the problem?
yeah, well, there are many aspects of it, most of which had never been solved before. It needed to be able to recognize music. Uh, that was a pretty big challenge, but that had already been addressed by some people. But um, it needed to be able to be resistant to noise and other distortions, because the music would be usually playing in the environment, and there'd be noise, people talking, um, maybe traffic or some other stuff going on. And so I think almost pretty much nobody had an algorithm that could handle that, and also
But
the anticipated amount of noise where the music might not be completely audible.
Mhm.
Um, Another challenge was scaling up the recognition, because the algorithms that did exist were often very, very slow. Um, and then the amount of processing time was prohibitive. There'd be there's some systems that would take a lot of computer power to recognize out of a small database of even 100 songs or so.
Uh-huh.
So that was and then so we had to scale the database up. It was already anticipated that we'd have to do a couple million songs,
Uh-huh.
and that was like a couple orders of magnitude bigger than anybody had ever worked on before.
Uh-huh.
So there are a number of challenges, any one of which was very challenging and that maybe people had looked at before but not been able to come up with a solution.
So why did you? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
so I had to solve all those problems.
But why? So why did you think you could solve a problem nobody else did yet? Even worse, a
Oh,
problem most people declared to be close to impossible to solve at the time.
right. Well, maybe because I don't necessarily have a lot of common sense.
So
It
naive
was
would be a point.
well, no, it was a technical challenge, and um, it was a little bit discouraging that nobody had done this before. Um, but there was actually so my advisor Julius Smith said there should be a solution. The existence proof of a solution is that humans can do it. So if people can do it with their ears, then a machine should be able to do it. And it's just a matter of finding out how, finding a solution.
Reminds me
So,
of
so at the time, I mean, there are people who had been working on it, but then at the time, nobody had found the solution that
Mhm.
was comparable to the human ear.
Mhm. Reminds me a bit about the approach of Elon Musk, who says we want to drive without lidar because humans can do it without lidar autonomously. So I like this at least I like this principle. Not sure uh, what it means for a business. How did your problem solving process and your day-to-day work look like then? Like you're set up with a problem nobody did solve yet. You get all of these business constraints. Of course, it needs to be done by yesterday, probably. Not
Hmm.
infinite amount of money, not infinite amount of time. Or did you actually have infinite amount of money? Not sure about this. Um, I could imagine not necessarily.
Well, we had
So
zero
how
money.
you okay, so how did your day-to-day work look like? How did you solve, how did you go about setting yourself up to solve
Well, at
problems?
the time, okay, so in fact, we started exactly right after the dot-com bubble burst, which is like potentially the worst possible time to have started a company.
Uh-huh.
Um, but and so my office space was the local cafe, and the rent was very cheap. It'd be a cup of coffee for the entire afternoon. Yeah, so I go with my laptop, and I had this mathematical modeling software called MATLAB, and which Chris bought from UC Berkeley using a student discount. um, and um, then I would read a little bit. Uh, it was I really didn't know how to approach the problem, and uh, but I tried out some things, and then one day, after working on it for about 3 months, I saw a trace in a certain graph that I realized was the solution, and from that point on, it was just kind of a matter of when you go between research to development. So I mean, there's plenty of research to do that, we continued for a number of years, but then it became a sort of an action plan to start building out the technology and making it faster, adding more songs. Uh, So there was an aha moment when
There
I
was this aha moment. I see, because like you said, how long did you work on it before having this first instance of thinking this
about
is
3 months.
possible? About 3 months. So these 3 months, were they, how did they feel, or how did you go about them? Was it a gradual progression towards this moment, or was it more of trying out tens and tens of ideas before anything worked, and then just suddenly one of those ideas would work out? How and
Yeah, well, speaking of progression, I think I started out from, okay, this is kind of a problem I'll just bang on for a bit, to increasing despair. So the
Right.
progress would be increasing amounts of despair because the pressure was increasing dramatically over that time. Um,
Why?
because my my co-founders, even before starting the development on the algorithm, they're already planning for it to be done by a certain date, which was sometime in June of year 2000, and they were already raising money. They had gotten an office, hiring people. Um, it's kind of hard to hire people with no money. Um, but just promises of future benefits of some sort.
Mhm.
Um, it was gaining momentum, even though we essentially didn't have the core technology to base the company on. As time went on, I thought, okay, so the guys probably shouldn't be this enthusiastic, and maybe don't do so many VC pushes, don't hire so many people, especially if you have no money. Um, just slow down a bit. I don't think I have this. Uh,
Did
and
you
then
did you think
Chris
you
went
could
on
solve it?
vacation. Oh, sorry.
Did, did you think you could solve it with time, or did you think this was indeed unsolvable for like? Did you think you had a time constraint, or a feasibility constraint?
Well, kind of both. So at first, I didn't know if the problem could be solved at all. And then as time went on, I became more and more convinced that that I wouldn't be able to find the solution.
Hmm.
Um, but in terms of time constraint, Chris and Philippe and Dheeraj had already, or my co-founders had already laid out a schedule. And it's kind of funny. They on the schedule they said it said establish office, hire people, invent algorithm. Um, so there's actually a deadline. Invent algorithm, and then scaling up servers and then launch date um, was a concrete. There was a concrete date on each of these items, and
How long did they plan for in that algorithm?
oh, um, well, they allowed me about 3 months. Uh, the schedule was I needed to invent it by June, and I started in March. Um, and it was part of the plan. And I met my goal. I invented it on schedule. Even though leading up to that, I was increasingly concerned that I would not be able to, that it was actually unsolvable.
So how did the solution then look like, and how did you have this idea? Where did this idea exactly come from? This one lead
Yeah,
that you
well,
followed through.
I just, hmm, I don't know. It was sort of a cloud. If I, it was sort of hazy looking back, exactly what my day-to-day thinking was. But um, I think half my thoughts at the time were thinking about how to ask Chris and Philippe, uh, uh, like if they had any other solutions,
To done
or
on base.
maybe, like I said before, maybe they should not be so enthusiastic about building the business at this time. Um, but then I was told that if I didn't invent the algorithm by a certain date, then Philippe would have to quit and get a new job, like a real job, um, or that Philippe would run out of money and then have to get a real job. So that was definitely a hard deadline. I mean, one sort of thing was to go back to first principles and try to imagine what the solution should look like, if there was a solution, because most of the techniques that were being used at the time, that people were working on, had undesirable, or they were sort of dead ends as far as this application was concerned. I mean, something that a lot of people do is they find a way to solve a problem, and it could be very inefficient, and then they say, well, then we'll spend time optimizing it, and then we'll make it go faster. But if you have the sort of wrong fundamental idea, you might paint yourself into a dead end. So you really need to think of the problem end to end, starting from the very beginning, starting from first principles. So, for example, the computational problem, for most of the solutions, in fact, all the solutions were, it could not be scaled. And then I have some discussion about that that are probably too long to go into here. And then also,
Can you describe in layman's terms how your algorithm looks like?
let's see, to lay out the problem, imagine you have all these songs and you just put them end to end to create one large audio file. So at some point in the company we had 50 million tracks. So imagine 50 million songs laid end to end in one big audio file. And then the question is, you have this sample of audio, about 5 seconds worth, and you want to find this segment in this long audio track, or this long soundtrack of 50 million songs. And so what could I do to find this? And so one idea is that if you do a feature analysis, and at the time the most used way of visualizing audio is the spectrogram, which is a decomposition of sound in terms of frequencies over time. And so you can kind of see, so if you look at a spectrogram, you can see where the energy is and how it flows over time. And in a way, it's like reading a musical score. So that seemed like it would be a good place to start. And so I did spend a lot of time just staring at spectrograms and looking for patterns. Then I realized that if you had two audio files that had the same content, well, obviously the spectrograms should look the same. And so then it became a question of, well, how do you match up those patterns? And I could see that if you put the patterns right next to each other, they would match up in time. And then I realized that if you correlate, well, if you look at the time offsets of the corresponding features, that time offset should actually be a constant. And then on a certain plot or a histogram, you'd be able to see a large correlation, one time offset that is very common among many features. And so that was one of the things that made me realize that this was a possible problem. I mean, that there was a possible solution. So that was, I mean, that's sort of a layman's very superficial description of how one aspect of it works.
The good thing about it is that actually you published a paper about this, a scientific paper in 2003. So anybody who is interested can read that up. The question for me would be, why did you not keep it a company secret? Why write a paper about it?
Well, at the time, we had already filed a number of patent applications on this. And so, in a way, the techniques were fully disclosed to the public already. As you know, a patent is where you disclose new inventions to the public, but then you are protected. You have a monopoly on that technology for 20 years. So the ideas were already in the public domain, and so I just thought I should just give a speech on it or give a talk on it.
I see. So researcher, like the researcher's mission in some sense to also spread the knowledge.
It's kind of fun.
So actually about this paper, I did my Fulbright myself in 2016 in Los Angeles. And when I did it, I met this very smart guy called Jannis Funk. He was studying, I think, movie production or something the like at UCLA. And he told me about his own startup, which he founded in the ecosystem of the Hasso-Plattner Institute in Potsdam. And I became super interested. And after coming back from Los Angeles to Essen at that time, I wanted to do an internship with him. And actually that worked out. I moved to Potsdam for a couple of months. And on my first day, what happened was that the company's vision of Jannis and his team and his co-founders was to create a movie application, a movie app, which would, as one feature, so a loyalty movie app, which would, as one feature, enable people in a movie cinema, like visitors viewers to a movie in the pre-show, to identify the trailers. And within the cinema, you often don't have internet. You don't have you just have your phone in a time constraint, in a memory constraint, network constraint setup to identify the movie trailers based on audio only. And so on my first day, when I came to our office, which was on the Studio Babelsberg area, actually I found your paper lying on my desk, and I was and my job was to implement this. I think they also already had a prototype. Paulo implemented the prototype, and my job was to implement that in a way that it would run natively on the iPhone and on Android. And that was so exciting. And when I saw your profile, I thought, that guy invented Shazam? No, that guy, actually I've read this paper, and it was actually this author of this paper who invented the algorithm. And then I looked up the paper again and found that, okay, so these names match. So that was actually a very funny coincidence. Yes, so very nice paper, by the way. How much did the algorithm change over time? Is it still like, now we live in a time of AI and machine learning? So is this core foundational idea of using time offsets and spectrograms, is that still part of the algorithm today? Can you share this?
Yeah. I'm not sure I can.
Maybe at the time you left the company.
Well, okay. So up until the time of the acquisition, and then I'm not allowed to comment further after that point. For well over 10 years, or let's say even 15 years, the basic algorithm had not changed.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So you stayed with Shazam for 18 more years after inventing the algorithm itself. So why so long? Naively, I would have thought that for a problem-driven person like I have met you now, the whole application would become boring the moment you solved it. So what was your role in the 1.5 decades to follow? What did you
Sounds
do?
like such a geological timescale. I mean, there are many technical challenges for all throughout. Making it more efficient, and dealing with certain challenges, like in certain situations, the recognition rate would be very low, and so I'd try to troubleshoot what happened. So that was just part of it. But what was very interesting were all the business challenges. So being involved in the executive management, dealing with partnerships, due diligence and all that. That was very interesting to me too, as well. So that's kind of the, I guess the more entrepreneurial side of me grew out.
I see.
But then after a certain point, it seemed like we were destined for an exit or an acquisition or going public or something within 18 months. And then that kept going on and on and on for at least 5 years, or a constant amount of time away from exiting.
I see. Um, what was the most enriching phase of this adventure?
Hmm. Um, well, I would say I guess the friendships, within a company, it was, we had fairly low turnover. A lot of people have stayed with the company. Some people, Shazam is their entire career. And we got along together very well. It was an exciting place to be for many reasons. I mean, in the music aspect, working with the music industry, working on partnerships with other companies. There are some dark times, but there are things that were also very interesting, very exciting to be involved with.
As said, Shazam was acquired in 2018 by Apple. Nowadays, you work with Apple as a principal research scientist. So I know that you can't share too many details of what you're working on currently, but how has your life changed from the early and maybe the more mature days of Shazam to today?
Well, I would say working for a company like Apple. I don't know if I'll get in trouble for this, but working for a company like Apple takes away a lot of the, I guess you would say, management or logistical challenges in working with a small company. So I feel like now I'm actually freer to do more research and speculative, investigations. So it's a big change. I feel like I'm working well in this new environment. And in fact,
And
there are many entrepreneurs at Apple, many people who I've met previously have also been acquired by Apple. So it's
what are the insolvable problems of today that you believe will become part of everyday life in the future?
hmm.
You have sample size 1, right? So, I I mean, extrapolating is always difficult, do you see comparable problems today?
Well, certainly, there are technical challenges in so many different areas. Um, uh, I don't think we've figured out consciousness and true artificial intelligence. There are challenges for humanity, as we see recently in the news. Global warming and all its challenges that threaten life on this planet. That's something that I think really deserves the best minds in the world to work on. There's so many areas. I think we're not going to run out of challenges anytime in the next billion years.
I thank you so much for having this conversation. Thank you so much for all the insights. Thanks so much for taking the time. It was fantastic having you. And I can only say good luck with the current projects, and we're very excited to see which kind of products you will be working on at some point in time where we can talk about them. Thank you so much.
Right. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.